Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into something highly controversial. We're going to impartially unpack a text that actually advocates for the institutionalization of polygyny. Now, right off the bat, I want to be super clear. Our goal today is strictly educational. We're just exploring the author's specific arguments, their data points, and their philosophical frameworks exactly as they present them. We aren't here to endorse this, and we aren't here to condemn it either. We're just looking under the hood to understand the mechanics of this perspective. Okay, so let's jump right in. The author starts by throwing a pretty provocative question our way, right out of the gate, to kind of shake up our preconceived notions about human mating. They ask, is true monogamy actually natural? Because according to the source material, there is a massive gap between what society tells us is morally correct and what humans just naturally do. And honestly, bridging that gap, that's the entire core premise of this book. To make sense of it all, the author lays out 12 interconnected reasons, which we've grouped into 5 main themes for this explainer. We'll look at the monogamy problem, social safeguards, the biology of it all, the economic angle, and finally, the actual rules of polygyny. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the monogamy problem. This is where the author really goes after the idea of serial monogamy. And they use some pretty interesting CDC survey data to make their point here. Look at this. Less than 18% of women and just over 11% of men report having only one sexual partner in their lifetime. The author essentially says, look, our society's moral baseline is built on an absolute exception. It's totally hypocritical, they argue, especially considering way more people have had, say, 5 to 9 partners rather than just one. To really hammer home this critique of serial monogamy, the author uses this wild mathematical model. Think about it. If a person has an average of 10 partners, and those partners all had 10 partners, well, this chart shows exponential growth. Within just 6 degrees of separation, you share indirect DNA connections with nearly 700,000 people. The text contrasts this giant, messy, unregulated network with polygyny, which they define as a closed loop that physically caps the spread of those indirect connections. Which brings us nicely to Section 2, social and family safeguards. Let's talk about accountability. Throughout the book, the author loves using these stark, side-by-side scenarios. For instance, they compare a manager having a secret affair with an employee to that same man taking her as a second wife. The argument here is that enforced monogamy basically breeds deception, ruined reputations, and abandoned single mothers. On the flip side, institutionalized polygyny replaces all that sneaking around with public accountability. It's an honorable, closed system where everybody's status and responsibilities are completely out in the open. And when it comes to the impact on kids, the author grounds their argument in this one staggering statistic, 22%. That is the percentage of children in the U.S. under the age of 18 who are living without a father in the home. So how does polygyny fix this? According to the text, it totally solves these social ills by holding high-value men accountable. The idea is, if men are culturally forced to marry the women they sleep with, casual abandonment just vanishes. Plus, it creates that closed ecosystem to stop disease, it gives kids present fathers and a real tribal identity. And, the author claims, it stops women from being emotionally wrecked, or as the book calls it, becoming alpha widows, by highly promiscuous men who never actually plan to commit. Now let's pivot a bit to Section 3, Biology and Marital Dynamics. This is all about the mismatched libido. To prove that there's a biological disconnect, the text breaks down sex drives across different age brackets. And as you can see, male and female libidos are basically crossing like ships in the night. They rarely match up over a lifetime. Maybe they briefly align in your 30s. Because of this massive biological incompatibility, the author argues that enforced monogamy literally incentivizes cheating, simply because partners' needs wildly diverge as they get older. This actually leads to a really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive concept the book calls the celibate effect. The argument goes that in a standard, monotonous marriage, a guy can get completely domesticated and lose his primal edge. But if a man proves his value by attracting a second wife, it reactivates his first wife's primordial desire for him. Essentially, knowing other women want your husband keeps him attractive and keeps the marriage spicy. The text puts it pretty bluntly. Danger and excitement. If you don't provide that sum of time, sometimes there is someone else who will. The author makes some really bold claims about female psychology here. They assert that women actually crave the subtle competition and that little element of danger that polygyny brings to the table.
The absolute safety of monogamy, that just leads to boredom. But having co-wives ensures everybody is continuously bringing their A game.
All right, let's talk money. Section 4, the economic argument, and how to escape the modern debt trap. To build this case, the author points out a massive financial hurdle, $120,000. That's the estimated pre-tax income needed for a single-earner family of 5 just to survive at a modest level in the U.S. today. And that's just housing, food, and basics, not even counting childcare. When you look at the data, the author reaches a pretty stark conclusion. Only about 20 to 25% of male earners actually make enough to afford that traditional stay-at-home wife lifestyle. The math literally forces the vast majority of families into the labor market out of pure necessity. The traditional single-earner household, it's basically a mathematical impossibility for most people now. So, the author's fix? A cooperative economic engine. By pooling multiple incomes or having one wife work while another provides built-in, free childcare, the family completely bypasses the modern banking system and the trap of debt. They envision this polygynous economy where families generate tangible goods, maybe running a family business or homesteading, creating these highly resilient, totally self-reliant micro-communities. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the rules of polygyny, because apparently this requires some intense discipline. The author explicitly warns that a man has to meet 4 incredibly strict criteria before even thinking about another wife. First, total affordability. The first wife's standard of living cannot drop an inch. Second, a massive sex drive. Get this, they even suggest a daily physical test for 6 straight months to prove it. Yeah, 6 months. Third, absolute leadership. You have to make the tough calls. And fourth, unwavering fairness. Strict schedules, zero favoritism. If you can't do all that, the text says you have absolutely no business pursuing this. I think this quote wraps up the author's philosophy perfectly. Basically, polygyny crushes the ego for everybody involved. Women have to conquer jealousy, and men have to drop their selfish whims to take on extreme responsibility. The author views it as a crucible that forces people into a state of spiritual elevation, self-mastery, and deep interdependency. So, as we wrap up this explainer, this deeply polarizing framework definitely leaves us with a lot to chew on, right? We've seen the author use math, biology, and economics to try and legitimize a totally taboo practice. But it leaves us pondering one final major question. Is restructuring society's baseline marriage laws the real key to solving our modern dysfunction? Or does it just open up a completely different Pandora's box? Thank you so much for joining me to explore the mechanics of this controversial text. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.